branded a disgrace and sold off like nothing. She thought the nightmare ended there. But the moment the Alpha King touched her, something inside him snapped awake, and everyone knew she was the one thing he should have never claimed. Now they all want her gone, but he refuses to let go. Before the story begins, drop your location in the comments, and once we finish, rate this tale from 0 to 10. All set? Let's begin. Alara Thorne had been crying long before the collectors arrived. In a kingdom where shifting was both honor and identity, being born without a wolf was worse than death. It was erasure. Her parents had never forgiven her for it, for the shame she brought to their bloodline, for the whispers that followed them through the village markets, for the pity that clung to their name like rot. The famine had only made it worse. When the crops failed and the livestock grew skeletal, her father's gaze had turned cold. Her mother stopped speaking her name altogether, referring to her only as the girl or that burden. Alara learned to make herself small, to move through their home like a ghost, hoping invisibility might buy her mercy. It hadn't. The collectors came at dusk, their black armor gleaming in the torchlight. The Alpha King's insignia burned into their chest plates like a brand. Alara had been scrubbing the floor when she heard her mother's voice, bright, eager, sickeningly sweet. She's healthy enough, young, obedient. Alara's hands stilled on the rag. Her heart began to hammer. The king's tribute requires no defects, one collector said, his voice flat. She has none. Her father lied smoothly. Just no wolf. But she works hard. She'll serve well. The words hit Alara like a fist to the chest. They were selling her. She stumbled into the main hall just as her father accepted the pouch of silver, his grin wide and shameless. Her mother stood beside him, eyes gleaming with greed, fingers already counting coins that hadn't yet touched her palm. "No," Alara whispered, tears spilling hot and fast. "Please, don't." "Quiet," her mother snapped, not even looking at her. "You should be grateful. You're finally worth something." The collectors seized her arms, dragging her forward. She fought, twisting against their iron grip, but it was useless. Through the blur of her tears, she saw him, the Alpha King himself, standing in the doorway like a pillar of stone and shadow. His storm gray eyes swept over her parents with cold assessment, then settled on her. His expression was unreadable, severe, unmoved by her tears or her parents' laughter. Alara's knees buckled, but the collectors held her upright, yanking her toward the door. Behind her, her father pocketed the silver. Her mother smiled. They didn't even say goodbye. As the night air bit into her skin and the palace carriages loomed ahead, one of the collectors leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "Night approaches," he growled, "and the king does not tolerate delays." The capital was a kingdom of stone and shadow, its towers clawing at the sky like broken teeth. Alara had never seen anything so vast, so cold, so utterly devoid of mercy. The palace loomed at the city's heart. Obsidian walls carved with ancient runes that seemed to pulse in the torchlight, as though the stone itself was alive and watchful. Rumors clung to the place like frost. A curse, the villagers whispered. A beast that stalks the halls. A king who rules by day, but vanishes when darkness falls. Alara had dismissed them as superstition. Now, standing in the palace's vast entry hall, she wasn't so sure. King Kyle Vorin stood at the top of the staircase, his presence commanding silence without a single word. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair pulled back to reveal a face carved from severity itself. His storm-gray eyes swept over the tributes gathered below, servants, laborers, offerings from frightened villages, and settled on Alara. "You," he said, his voice low and absolute. "Come forward." Her legs trembled, but she obeyed. The other tributes were dismissed to the servants' quarters. Alara was not. Instead, she was led through winding corridors lit only by firelight, deeper and deeper into the palace's ancient core. The air grew heavier, colder. Runes carved into the walls glowed faintly, their symbols unfamiliar and unsettling. Finally, they stopped before a massive iron door bound with chains and sealed with marks Alara didn't recognize. King Kyle turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You will tend to the creature within," he said. "You will obey 3 rules without exception." Alara's breath caught. "Do not let it see your face. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not scream no matter what you hear." His eyes bored into hers. "Fail, and you will die." Before she could protest, the chains were unlocked. The door groaned open, revealing a chamber swallowed in darkness. A soldier shoved her inside. The door slammed shut behind her. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate, claws dragging across stone. A presence moved in the shadows, massive and unseen, breathing, watching. Alara pressed herself against the wall, her heart a wild drum in her chest. Then from the darkness came a voice, deep, rough, impossibly gentle. Alara. Her name. It knew her name. She froze, terror locking her limbs in place as the creature in the shadows took another step closer. Days bled into nights in the ancient wing, each one measured by tasks performed in trembling silence. Alara delivered trays of raw meat and water, stoked fires that burned without warmth, and kept her eyes fixed on the stone floor. She never looked into the darkness, never spoke first, but the creature spoke to her. "Why do you flinch when footsteps approach?" he asked on the 3rd night, his voice rumbling from somewhere beyond the firelight. Alara's hands stilled on the water basin. She shouldn't answer. The rules were clear. "I asked you a question, little one." Her throat tightened. "Because footsteps have never brought me anything good." A low sound, half growl, half exhale, echoed through the chamber. Not threatening, almost satisfied. Each night he asked more, about her childhood, her parents, the village that had turned away when she needed them most. Alara found herself answering, the words spilling out like water through cracked stone. She told him things she'd never spoken aloud. How her mother had stopped braiding her hair after her 5th birthday. How her father had built a separate table so he wouldn't have to see her face during meals. "I was never wanted," she whispered one night, her voice breaking. "Not once." The growl that followed was nothing like before. It was pure fury, claws scraping violently against stone, a snarl that shook the walls. Alara stumbled backward, fear spiking through her chest. Then his voice cut through the rage, rough and raw. They were fools. Blind, greedy fools. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry for her. Something shifted in Alara's chest, a warmth she couldn't name, a pull that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She found herself leaning toward the darkness instead of away from it, listening for his breathing, craving the sound of his voice. There was no danger here. Only loneliness that mirrored her own. "Why does the king keep you hidden?" she asked softly, breaking her own silence. A pause, then quieter than before. "Because what I am would destroy everything he's built." Alara's brow furrowed. The way he spoke, intelligent, controlled, almost regal. Who was he? The creature moved closer, and she caught a glimpse of massive clawed fingers just beyond the firelight, careful not to step into view. "You smell like fate, Alara," he whispered, his voice tinged with something that sounded like sorrow. "And fate has never been kind to me." Alara made her decision at sunset. For the first time in her life, someone had listened to her pain without judgment, without disgust. The creature in the darkness had given her what no one else ever had: worth. She needed to thank him, to tell him he'd saved her from drowning in her own isolation. She pushed open the iron door before the guards could stop her, before night fully claimed the sky. The chamber was bathed in dying sunlight, and there, in the center of the room, was not a monster. It was King Kyle, shirtless, bleeding, his body contorting in ways that defied nature, bones cracking audibly, muscles rippling beneath skin that flickered between flesh and something darker, scaled, ancient. His hands gripped the stone floor, claws extending and retracting with each shuddering breath. His storm gray eyes flashed gold, then gray, then gold again. He was breaking apart. "You weren't supposed to be here." Kyle's voice tore from his throat, half human, half growl. His head snapped toward her, and the anguish in his gaze was unbearable. "Get out, now!" But Alara couldn't move. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The king who vanished at nightfall. The creature who spoke with intelligence and sorrow. The voice she'd come to trust. They were the same. "You," she breathed. "It's been you all along." Another crack, his spine arching violently. Kyle's roar shook the walls. "I'm losing control. If you stay, I'll kill you." Alara stumbled forward instead of back. "You won't. You never have. You don't understand what I become." His words came through clenched teeth, through transformation that looked like torture. Horns began pressing through his skull, his frame expanding, becoming monstrous. "I see you," Alara said, her voice steady even as tears blurred her vision. "I see the man beneath the claws. I see guards." Kale's command was absolute, desperate. The door burst open. Armored hands seized Alara, dragging her backward. She fought against their grip, her eyes locked on Kyle as his humanity slipped further away. "Please," she cried. "Don't send me away!" Kael's clawed hand reached toward her, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for her to see the agony in his golden eyes, before he forced it back down. "Go," he rasped, the last syllable twisting into something inhuman. Alara's fingers stretched toward him even as the guards pulled her through the doorway. Their eyes met one final time before the iron door slammed shut. And behind it, a beast roared with the sound of a broken man. The chamber they locked her in was gilded and suffocating. Silk curtains, velvet cushions, a bed fit for nobility. Everything she'd never had, and none of it mattered. Guards stood posted outside her door with strict orders. She was forbidden to approach the ancient wing. Forbidden to speak of what she'd seen. Forbidden to reach the one person who'd ever made her feel whole. But the bond had other plans. It surged through her veins like wildfire. Pulling, aching, demanding. She felt his pain as though it were her own. The agony of transformation, the suffocating loneliness, the fear that consumed him when he thought of her. At night, she pressed her hands to her chest and gasped for air, certain her heart would tear itself apart trying to reach him. When dawn broke, Kael came. He stood in her doorway, fully human again, dressed in royal armor that made him look untouchable. But his storm-gray eyes were haunted, shadows carved beneath them like he hadn't slept in days. "You're leaving the kingdom," he said without preamble. "Today." Alara rose from the bed, her heart hammering. "No. This isn't a request." His voice was iron, but she heard the fracture beneath it. "Why?" she demanded. "Because you're afraid of what you are? Because you think you'll hurt me?" "Because I will hurt you." The words exploded from him, raw and desperate. He stepped forward, then caught himself, maintaining distance like she was poison. "The curse doesn't just change me, Alara. It kills. Every woman fated to me, every mate, dies. The bond itself becomes a noose. I won't let that happen to you. You don't get to decide that for me. I'm your king. You're the man I'm falling for." The confession tore from her throat before she could stop it. Kael flinched as though she'd struck him. For a moment, his composure shattered completely, longing and torment warring across his face. Then he rebuilt the walls, brick by brick. "Guards," he called, his voice hollow. "Prepare her departure." He turned to leave. "Kael, the court already questions why I protect a wolfless girl," he said without looking back. "Nobles call you a distraction, a disgrace. If they discover what you are to me, they'll use you to destroy everything I've fought to build." His hand gripped the door frame until his knuckles whitened. "I can survive being a monster, Alara. I cannot survive being the reason you die." The door closed, and Alara felt the bond scream in protest, pulling her toward a man who was walking away to save her life. They arrived 3 days later, draped in new clothes bought with blood money. Alara was being escorted through the palace corridors when she heard her mother's voice, sharp, demanding, echoing through the throne room. Her blood turned to ice. "We've come to reclaim our daughter. We have a buyer. Alpha Draven of the Northern Pack has offered triple what the king paid." The guards holding Alara's arms tensed. One whispered urgently for reinforcements. She was dragged into the throne room just as her father added, "The girl is still ours by law. The tribute contract allows for buyback." Kael sat on his throne like a carved monument of fury. Nobles lined the walls, their expressions ranging from disgust to cruel amusement. Alara's presence among them had been scandal enough, a wolfless girl sleeping under the king's roof. Now her parents wanted to auction her off like cattle. "She is defective," one noble sneered. "Let them take her. The king has no need for broken goods." "She's an embarrassment to the crown," another agreed. Alara's mother stepped forward, greed glittering in her eyes. "Come, girl. You've caused enough trouble here." "No." Alara's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the room. Her father's hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. "You don't get to refuse." Kael moved. One moment he was on his throne. The next he was standing between Alara and her parents, his eyes flashing gold, a warning of the beast rising beneath his skin. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Touch her again," Kael said, his voice dropping into something inhuman, "and I will tear you apart." The nobles gasped. Her parents stumbled backward, but her mother, foolish with greed, persisted. "She belongs to—" Kael's hand closed around Alara's throat, gentle, possessive, and his canines elongated. The mark came swift and searing, a bite at the junction of her neck and shoulder. The bond snapping into place with devastating finality. The room exploded. "Blasphemy!" a noble roared. "He's marked a wolfless girl. The bloodline is tainted. This is treason against tradition." Alara sagged against Kael, her body burning with the mark's power. Through the chaos, she heard her mother shriek, "We could have gotten more for her." Kael held Alara upright, his jaw clenched, his breathing ragged. When he looked down at her, she saw not triumph but terror. He'd just claimed her before the kingdom. And if the curse held true, he'd signed her death warrant. "Clear the room," he commanded, his voice fracturing. "Now." But the damage was done. The kingdom had witnessed their king choose a disgrace, and rebellion was already brewing in the whispers. The peace council convened in the grand courtyard, beneath a sky bleeding orange and gold. Kael had agreed to meet with the rival alphas, a desperate attempt to quell the uprising before it became war. Representatives from 6 territories gathered, their faces carved with skepticism and thinly veiled contempt. Alara watched from the shadows of the colonnade, hidden among servants and spectators. Kael had forbidden her to attend, but she couldn't stay away. The mark on her neck throbbed with warning, the bond pulling taut with anxiety. Something was wrong. Kael stood at the center of the courtyard, his posture regal despite the sun sinking dangerously low on the horizon. She could see the strain in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched against the transformation beginning to stir beneath his skin. Moonrise was minutes away. "Alpha Draven," Kael addressed the Northern Pack leader, his voice steady. "Your grievances will be heard. I ask only for—" The first arrow came without warning. It whistled through the air, its tip gleaming with silver bane. the poison that burned through shifter blood like acid, aimed directly at Kael's heart. Alara didn't think. She ran. Her body collided with Kael's, shoving him sideways with strength she didn't know she possessed. The arrow struck true, but it struck her instead, burying itself deep in her chest just below her collarbone. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and consuming. She heard Kael scream her name as she fell, felt his arms catch her before she hit the stone. No, 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 no. His voice fractured, inhuman sounds bleeding through. Alara, stay with me. Blood spread across her torn dress, warm and terrifyingly fast. She tried to speak, but only managed a gasping breath. Through dimming vision, she saw chaos erupting. Guards seizing the assassins, alphas shouting accusations, steel ringing against steel. Above her, Kael's face twisted in agony. His eyes flashed gold, then stayed gold. His canines lengthened. Hold on, he begged, pressing his hand to her wound. Please, just hold on. The sun touched the horizon. Kael's spine arched. A roar tore from his throat. Not human, not wolf. Something ancient and terrible that shook the very stones of the courtyard. His body began to shift, bones cracking, muscles expanding. The curse was taking him, and Alara, bleeding in his arms, was the only thing standing between the beast's rage and a kingdom that had just tried to murder its king. Her hand reached up, trembling, to touch his transforming face. Kael, she whispered. I'm here. The beast's golden eyes locked onto hers as the transformation consumed him completely. The courtyard fell silent. Where King Kael had knelt moments before, a creature of nightmare now stood. Towering, massive, his body wreathed in shadow and power. Curved horns spiraled from his skull, obsidian black and gleaming. His hands, no, his claws, were the size of daggers, capable of tearing stone. Muscles rippled beneath skin that seemed caught between human flesh and something scaled, ancient, otherworldly. His golden eyes burned like twin suns. A delegate screamed, then another. Nobles scrambled backward, tripping over their own robes in their desperation to flee. Guards raised trembling spears, though none dared approach. Monster, someone shrieked. The curse, it's real! Run! The beast's head swiveled toward the chaos, toward the assassins who'd tried to murder his human half. A growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a sound that promised death, that made the earth itself seem to shudder. He took one step forward, then stopped. Because Alara's hand, blood-slicked and shaking, had touched his clawed forearm. Kael, she breathed, her voice barely audible over the screaming. Look at me. The beast's massive head turned, and for a heartbeat, everyone saw what should have been impossible, the monster hesitating. His claws hovering inches from her bleeding form, careful not to harm her even as rage burned through his transformed body. Alara's vision swam, pain radiating from the arrow still buried in her chest. But she didn't look away. She met those golden eyes with everything she had left. Trust me, she whispered. The beast's breathing slowed. His claws retracted just slightly. And then, impossibly, he lowered himself to the ground beside her. his massive frame curling protectively around her fragile, wounded body. He didn't rampage, didn't slaughter, didn't destroy. He shielded her. The courtyard stood frozen in disbelief. Nobles who'd been fleeing now stared, mouths agape. Guards lowered their weapons. Even the assassins, pinned beneath soldiers' blades, watched in stunned silence. The beast that kings feared, the curse that had isolated Kael for years, the monster that legends warned would destroy everything, was docile in her presence. Alpha Draven's voice broke the silence, rough with shock. She controls it. No, someone else whispered. She calms it. The beast's golden gaze swept across the courtyard, a warning clear in those inhuman eyes. Touch her, and I will end you. Then, with excruciating gentleness, one massive claw pressed against Alara's wound, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Alara's hand found his, her fingers wrapping around a single clawed digit. "I've got you," she murmured, though she was the one dying. "I've got you." And the kingdom finally understood. She wasn't his victim. She was his salvation. But salvation came at a price. The beast's breathing grew labored, each exhale rattling through his massive chest. Blood, both human and something darker, more ancient, seeped from wounds Alara hadn't noticed before. The transformation had torn him apart from the inside, and now both halves of him were dying. No. Alara's voice cracked as she pushed herself upright, ignoring the screaming agony in her chest. The arrow shifted, sending fresh waves of pain through her body, but she didn't stop. She crawled toward him, leaving a trail of crimson across the stone. "Alara, don't," someone shouted. A healer, maybe. A guard. It didn't matter. She reached the beast's face, her trembling hands finding the rough texture of his jaw. His golden eyes, once burning with fury, now dimmed with each struggling breath. "Listen to me," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with blood and dirt. "I don't care what they say. I don't care about curses or prophecies or tradition." The beast's eyes focused on her, a very human understanding flickering in their depth. "King or monster, man or beast, I choose you, all of you. Every broken, beautiful piece." Her voice grew stronger despite her fading strength. "I choose you, Kael Vorin, and I will keep choosing you until my last breath." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Then the world ignited. Magic erupted from where their skin touched. Blinding white light that shot through the courtyard like lightning. Ancient runes carved into the palace stones blazed to life, burning with power that hadn't stirred in generations. The curse, woven through blood and sacrifice, met something stronger. Love freely given. Acceptance without condition. It shattered. The beast roared, not in pain but in release, as his body convulsed. Bones cracked, reshaped, transformed. But this time, there was no agony in it, only liberation. The horns receded, the claws retracted, the massive frame condensed. In seconds, Kael knelt before her, fully human, whole in a way he'd never been before. His storm gray eyes, no longer fractured by gold, locked onto hers with devastating clarity. Elara, he breathed, pulling her into his arms with infinite gentleness. You broke it. You broke the curse. Around them, the courtyard remained frozen in shock. Nobles, guards, rival alphas, all witnessing the impossible. Kyle lifted Alara's face to his and marked her again, his bite deliberate and reverent. Not a claim born of desperation, but of devotion. My mate, he declared, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. My queen. One by one, the kingdom knelt. Alara Thorne, discarded, sold, deemed worthless, had become the woman who saved a king and freed a beast. And in his arms, despite her wounds, she finally understood what it meant to be chosen in return. Did you enjoy this story? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.